I grew up on that land. Every inch of dirt, every fence post, every creaking barn door held the voice of generations. My great-great-grandfather built the first cabin there with his own hands, long before paved roads and shiny streetlights arrived. We raised cattle, fixed tractors with duct tape and spit, and waved at anyone who passed by, even if we didn't know him. It wasn't just land. It was home. But the town started changing. Developers crept in with smiles and blueprints. Fancy subdivisions popped up where wildflowers once grew. City people bought up land, slapped up fences, and formed their little associations. And just like that, the old ways were threatened by new rules, new people, and their big egos in small meetings. At first, I tried to keep my distance. I didn't go to the HOA meetings. I didn't complain when they posted quiet hours signs or mailed me pamphlets about how to trim trees. My ranch was on the edge of their neighborhood anyway, technically not under their rules. But that didn't stop them from trying. One woman in particular, Karen, of course, started showing up unannounced. She was the HOA president, or queen, or whatever title she gave herself. She wore big sunglasses, drove a bright white SUV, and acted like the world owed her a parade. "Your barn is an eyesore," she told me one day, standing right at my gate without even asking to come in. "It's been here longer than you've been alive," I answered. "Well, it lowers the property value for the homes nearby." I almost laughed. Those houses didn't even exist 5 years ago. She didn't smile. Just handed me a typed-out compliance notice and told me I needed to repaint the barn, remove the windmill, and stop keeping livestock so close to the fence. That's when I realized this wasn't just about appearances. Karen didn't want me there. I was too loud, too rural, too real for her curated neighborhood fantasy. The next few weeks were chaos. I started getting letters. Some came taped to my gate, others stuffed in my mailbox. Complaints, demands, fines, ridiculous ones, for things like unauthorized fencing materials and non-compliant roofing on a shed that was built before the HOA existed. I ignored them. Then things got aggressive. One morning, I stepped outside and found a group of HOA members walking my fence line with clipboards. They weren't just looking, they were measuring, inspecting, pointing at my well pump like it was a toxic waste dump. I told them to leave. Karen stood her ground. "This land is encroaching on HOA property," she snapped, waving some documents she printed off Google Maps. "You're trespassing," I said. "This ranch has been here for 150 years. Your subdivision is barely potty trained." She didn't laugh. That night, I heard tires on gravel and stepped out onto the porch with a flashlight. Karen and another board member were parked near my barn. I walked over, calm but firm. That's when it happened. He pulled a gun. No warning. No shouting. Just cold steel pointed in my direction. "Back off," the man said, hand shaking like he wasn't used to holding anything more dangerous than a salad fork. Karen stood behind him, arms crossed, watching. No shock. No fear. Like this was normal. Like this was her right. I raised my hands not because I was scared, but because I was stunned. This wasn't just some argument over fence paint. This was a threat. A real one. They didn't fire. They just stood there like cowards, then got in their car and drove off once I told them I was calling the sheriff. And that night, as I sat in the dark with my shotgun across my lap, one thing became clear. They didn't just want me gone. They thought they could scare me into giving up a piece of my family's soul. But they messed with the wrong man. I wasn't about to roll over and let a bunch of clipboard bullies rewrite history. If they wanted a war over land, I was ready, and I already knew how I was going to fight back. The next morning, the sun rose like it always did, but everything felt different. The land was the same, but now it felt like it needed defending. I sat on the porch with a cup of strong black coffee, boots on the rail, Red lying at my feet. He could sense the tension too. Every sound made his ears perk up. Every car that passed, he watched like a hawk. I replayed the night in my head, over and over. The moment that gun came out. The look in Karen's eyes. Not surprise. Not hesitation. Just entitlement. Like she truly believed my land belonged to her just because it didn't fit into her perfectly landscaped neighborhood fantasy. So I called the sheriff's office. Told them everything. They sent a deputy out, a young guy with a buzz cut and a clipboard. He took notes, nodded a lot, and said the usual, "We'll look into it." I didn't expect much, but it had to be on record. If this was going to turn into something worse, I needed to start building my trail. Karen must have gotten word, because the letters stopped. But her attitude didn't. A few days later, I found a stack of HOA violation notices stapled to the wooden post at the end of my drive. The usual garbage, unpermitted structures, nuisance odors, and my favorite, failure to maintain visual harmony. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Visual harmony? On a cattle ranch? They were trying to wear me down. Little by little. Like termites gnawing at the foundation of an old house. But they didn't realize, this house had been built to last. I drove into town and visited the county land records office. Pulled every deed, plat map, and boundary report going back 100 years. My ranch sat clearly outside their HOA lines. I highlighted it, printed it, and taped it right over their latest violation letter. Left it on the post for them to see. But I wasn't stopping there. I started digging deeper. Talking to neighbors. Asking questions. Turns out, not everyone was a fan of the HOA. Some folks had lived here long before the subdivisions rolled in, and they were tired of Karen's games too. The constant fines. The silly restrictions. The way she made people feel like they owed her something. One older couple told me she made them repaint their door 3 times in 1 month, because it didn't match the seasonal palette. Another guy said he got a notice for parking his truck outside overnight. Not broken down. Not blocking anything. Just existing. That's when the idea hit me. A slow, steady fire started burning in my chest. What if I didn't just fight back? What if I bought them out? I'd done well over the years. Sold off a few side businesses. Invested smart. I had some cash. Enough to make something happen if I moved carefully. So I started making calls. Reached out to folks quietly. Asked if they'd ever consider selling. Not in bulk, just one property at a time. Some laughed. Some hesitated. But a few were interested. Especially the ones Karen had messed with. I made fair offers. No pressure. No tricks. Just honest business. A few weeks in, I closed on 2 small properties. Nobody noticed. I didn't brag. Didn't post it. Just updated the titles and waited. Then came the 3rd. And the 4th. And that's when Karen noticed something was up. She called me one morning. Called me. Her voice was sweet as sugar. "Hi there, I heard you've been making some real estate moves. Mind if I ask what your plan is?" I said, "Just investing in the neighborhood. Supporting the community, you know." She laughed nervously. "Well, just remember, there are rules in place." I said, "Not on the properties I own. And soon, maybe not on yours either." Then I hung up. She didn't call back. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because every new deed I signed was a step closer to the real goal, flipping the power. One lot at a time, I was changing the rules, and Karen had no idea just how deep I was willing to go. It didn't take long before Karen started to panic. Word travels fast in small communities, and even faster when the HOA queen starts losing her grip. By the time I bought my 6th property, people were starting to talk. I heard it at the hardware store, the feed supply, even at the barbershop. "She's sweating," one guy said with a chuckle while waiting for his trim. "Heard she's called 3 emergency board meetings this month," someone else added. "She should have just left him alone," another muttered from behind a newspaper. And they were right. If she had just minded her business and let me live in peace, none of this would have happened. But now, I wasn't just protecting what was mine. I was winning. Quietly, strategically, and with every signature, I was rewriting the future of this neighborhood. I didn't show off. Didn't announce which homes I owned. Most of them I rented out at a discount to local families, good folks who just wanted to be left alone. They knew the deal. Keep the place tidy, don't cause trouble, and you'll never hear from me unless it's to say howdy. No inspections. No fines. No seasonal pallets. Just peace. But not for Karen. Because her mansion, sitting loud and proud on the corner lot, was about to get caught in a net she never saw coming. You see, her house backed up to 3 of the properties I now owned. She had no idea, at first, until one day she looked out her window and saw a new fence going up. Not a cheap white plastic one, but solid, heavy wood with thick posts. The kind that says, "This is my land, and you don't cross it." She called me. "This fence is obstructing the view from my kitchen window," she said, her voice tight and irritated. "It's on my property," I replied. "Yes, but the HOA has guidelines about visual flow and—" "Karen," I interrupted, "your guidelines don't apply here. And pretty soon, they won't apply anywhere." I hung up before she could respond. The next week, I met with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a specialist in property law and HOA regulations. I laid out everything. The threats, the gun incident, the documents showing I wasn't under their jurisdiction. Then I showed him the properties I now owned and the HOA bylaws. He leaned back, tapped the folder, and smiled. "You realize what you're doing, right?" "I do." "You're flipping the board." "Exactly. Because here's the thing about HOAs, they're only as strong as the people holding the keys. And if enough property owners vote, well, the rules can change. Leadership can change. Everything can change. I wasn't just buying property anymore. I was buying votes. And when I had enough, I called for a meeting. Karen tried to stop it, of course. She sent out a mass email claiming I was trying to undermine community standards and destroy property values. But it was too late. Too many people were tired of her nonsense. Tired of the threats, the fake smiles, the control. That meeting was the first time I'd stepped foot into the HOA clubhouse. It was a beige building with fake plants and framed quotes about harmony and excellence. But that night, it felt more like a courtroom. Karen sat at the front, arms folded, lips tight. I stood, looked around at the faces, some angry, some hopeful, some just curious, and I spoke. "I didn't ask for this fight," I said. "But you came to my land, made threats, pulled a gun, and tried to take what wasn't yours. Now I own a third of this neighborhood. And I'm here to make sure that never happens again." The room was dead silent. Then, one by one, hands started going up. By the end of the night, the board had been replaced. Karen? Voted out. And I wasn't done with her yet. Because she didn't just lose her title. She was about to become my tenant. And let's just say, I had big plans for her rent. The eviction notice wasn't the first thing Karen expected to find taped to her door. But that's exactly what greeted her one bright Monday morning. A yellow slip, bold print, signed and sealed. Not from a judge. Not from the HOA. From me. Her new landlord. You could hear the scream halfway down the block. She stormed into the clubhouse, demanding a meeting, only to be reminded that she no longer had any power there. No title. No authority. Just another homeowner in a neighborhood she once ruled. Now, she'd have to answer to the very man she tried to bully off his own land. I didn't evict her just yet. That would have been too easy. Instead, I doubled her rent. Not once, but 10 times. I had the paperwork ready. Legal. Ironclad. Within the limits of the state laws for rental increases due to ownership transfer and reclassification. She had 30 days to accept the new lease or leave. At first, she tried to play the victim. Cried about community values and neighborly spirit. Claimed I was weaponizing property. Then she tried bargaining, offering to make peace, and suggesting we could reset everything. I told her I didn't come for peace. I came for balance. She didn't like that. Suddenly, all the charm disappeared. She went full Karen. Threats. Legal talk. Claims of discrimination. She even tried to report me to the local news, called herself a targeted homeowner. But the reporter who showed up recognized me immediately. "You're the ranch guy," he said. "The one she pulled a gun on?" I nodded. The segment never aired. Karen had officially run out of people to control. And still, I didn't stop. I started improving the properties I'd bought. Added privacy fences. Cleaned up yards. Repainted houses. Gave families lower rent and more freedom. And while all this was happening, Karen's house started to look like the odd one out. Overgrown grass. cracked driveway, peeling paint. No more luxury image, just a decaying reminder of what she used to be. Neighbors who once feared her now waved at me when I drove by. Some brought over pie, others just said thank you. They were free now. Free from the fines. From the threats. From the constant feeling that someone was watching and judging. But Karen wasn't done being petty. One day, she called in a complaint to the county. Claimed my cattle were producing noise pollution. On a ranch. In a town built on agriculture. The inspector who showed up was an old friend of my dad's. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his clipboard. She's desperate, he told me. Hang in there. I did more than hang in. I bought the lot directly behind her backyard. It was a narrow strip of land that no one really wanted. But it touched her fence. I cleared it, leveled it, and planted a row of tall cedar trees. They grew fast, blocking her view of the hills. She could no longer see the ranch she once tried to claim. All she could see was green wall after green wall. Privacy? Granted. But not the way she hoped. Then I added motion-triggered sprinklers facing the cedar row, strictly for keeping them healthy, of course. But every time she tried to peek over or yell at the workers, she got soaked. Red always barked at her from the other side, wagging his tail like it was a game. The last time I saw her, she was standing on her porch, clutching another rent notice in one hand and a cell phone in the other. She locked eyes with me as I walked Red past her house. She didn't speak. I didn't either. Because nothing needed to be said. She used to run this place with rules and threats. Now, she answered to a man she tried to bury with paperwork and fear. A man who remembered his roots. Who protected his legacy. And who learned, step by step, how to flip the whole game. And I was just getting started. A week after the last rent notice went out, Karen put her house on the market. Quietly. No open house. No grand estate tour, like she used to boast about. Just a plain sign in the yard with a real estate company's name printed in small letters. No flyers, no balloons, just silence. But the thing is, no one wanted to buy it. Word had already gotten around. People knew the house came with history, and not the good kind. They knew about the gun. They knew about the votes. They knew Karen had been dethroned in the most satisfying way possible. And nobody wanted to live in the castle of a fallen tyrant. Some folks even joked that the place was cursed. One neighbor said her dog refused to walk past it. Another swore the house gave him chills every time he mowed his lawn nearby. I didn't feed the rumors, but I didn't fight them either. Sometimes karma speaks louder than any story ever could. Karen tried lowering the price. Then lowered it again. Still no takers. Meanwhile, I kept buying. 3 more houses. Then another corner lot. The neighborhood wasn't just turning, it was flipping upside down. People were starting to realize that this wasn't just about power. It was about peace. About rebuilding what Karen had torn apart with years of control and arrogance. I hired a local crew, young guys trying to make a name for themselves, and paid them well to clean up every property I owned. New siding, fresh paint, flower beds, even little wooden benches under shade trees. Kids rode bikes in the street again. Couples walked hand in hand after dinner. The place felt lighter, but not for her. Karen's house sat like a lonely monument. Big, empty, forgotten. Her calls stopped. Her complaints disappeared. The only sound coming from that direction was the occasional slamming of a door or the hum of her AC unit struggling in the heat. Then one day I got a letter. Not from her, but from her real estate agent. A formal offer. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in buying her house. I stared at that letter for a while. Not because I was surprised, but because of what it represented. After all the threats, all the fake notices, all the attempts to drive me off the land, now she was offering me the keys to her kingdom. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked the fence line that night with Red by my side. Watched the sun set over the hills. The same hills her window used to overlook before I planted those trees. I thought about my great-grandfather, who built this ranch from nothing. About my parents, who worked until their hands were cracked and raw just to hold on to it. About the moment that gun was pointed at me, on the very land I bled for. Then I smiled. I called her agent the next morning. Tough market, I said. I'll offer half what she's asking. And she can take it or leave it. He paused. I'll let her know. She took it. The sale went through 2 weeks later. Cash deal. Quick and clean. I never saw her during the signing, and she left town before the ink even dried. Packed her SUV and disappeared like a chapter closing itself. I walked into that house for the first time with no anger. No pride. Just curiosity. It was cold. Expensive, but empty. Marble floors. Chandeliers. A kitchen that had probably never been cooked in. No soul. No history. Just the shell of a life built on control. I didn't plan to live in it. I didn't need it. But I kept it. Turned it into a home for veterans. A safe space. 6 bedrooms. Therapy dogs. Gardening space in the back where the pool used to be. The one she designed to impress. Now it grows tomatoes and herbs for people who served this country. Funny how things turn out. All I ever wanted was to be left alone. To live where my family lived. To raise cattle, drink coffee on my porch, and grow old with the land beneath my boots. But when they tried to take that from me, they didn't just wake the past. They woke a storm. I never set out to take over the neighborhood. That was never the plan. I just wanted to protect my ranch, the same one that raised me, that raised my father and his before him. But once the first shot was fired, once that gun was pointed at me in my own yard, I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope for things to settle. That was the moment everything changed. That was when I realized some wars come to your front door without warning. But now, things were different. There was a rhythm to the days again. A peace I hadn't felt in years. I'd walk the property in the mornings, Red padding along beside me, both of us calm, quiet, alert, but not tense. Not anymore. The cedar trees along the back lot had grown thick, and when the wind blew through them, it sounded like the land itself was exhaling. I liked to think the ranch knew we were safe now. The neighborhood had a new feel too. Families who used to keep their heads down were now planting flowers, grilling in the front yard, and waving at each other again. No one watched their backs or scanned the street for rule enforcers anymore. Kids played without fear of being told their bikes were violating lawn decorum. People were happy. Free. That was the real win. It wasn't just the properties I'd bought or the titles I'd changed. It was the culture I'd restored. The sense of community that had been drained by years of Karen's reign was finally coming back, lot by lot, heartbeat by heartbeat. Funny thing is, some of the very people who once voted with her were now asking if they could sell to me. I didn't say yes to all of them, only the ones who truly wanted out. The ones who realized they'd been trapped in something built on fear and fake power. I never rubbed it in. Never gloated. I didn't need to. Truth has a quiet way of making its point. The clubhouse, once the heart of Karen's rule, had become something entirely new. We opened it up to everyone. No more gatekeeping. No more RSVP-only events. Friday night potlucks returned. We brought in local musicians, old-school country blues, set up fire pits, and let people sit around and talk like neighbors used to. One night, I stood near the back, watching folks eat homemade chili and pass around cornbread. Someone handed me a cold soda, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "You saved this place." I shook my head. I just reminded people they could save it themselves. But deep down, I knew what they meant. Because it wasn't just about land. Or property lines. Or even that ridiculous pool Karen wanted to build on my soil. It was about belonging. About not letting arrogance and fear destroy something sacred. This ranch wasn't just dirt and fences. It was memory. Legacy. Still, there were moments where it all caught up with me. One evening, I found an old journal in a box of my father's things. Inside were entries about the ranch. Plans for repairs, lists of livestock, notes about neighbors. But one page stood out. In shaky handwriting he'd written, *, protect the land. Not just for us. For what it means. I sat there for a long while, reading that sentence over and over. He never saw what would happen. Never met Karen. Never witnessed the courtroom battles, the fences, the spray-painted threats on my barn door. But somehow he knew. Knew it would always fall to someone to hold the line. That night, I placed that page inside a frame and hung it above the front door. Every time I leave the house now, I see it. And I carry it with me. Through every fence post I mend, every neighbor I welcome, every family I give a break on rent. The storm may be over, but the roots keep growing. And they run deep. Because when someone tries to take your land with force, what they don't understand is, they're not just stealing your property. They're challenging your purpose. It was mid-October when I noticed something strange, an unfamiliar car parked near the old oak tree by the edge of the property. It wasn't one of my renters, and it definitely wasn't from around here. The car was sleek, black, tinted windows, and too clean for a place like this. I watched from a distance for a while. Nobody got out. About an hour later, the driver finally stepped into view. Karen. She didn't have the same fire in her walk anymore. No clipboard. No phone glued to her ear. Just her, alone, standing under the tree like she was trying to remember something. Or maybe forget something. She didn't come toward the ranch house. Didn't wave. Just stood there looking out over the fields like they used to be hers. But they never were. I stayed where I was, leaning against the barn, arms crossed, watching her like I'd watch a storm roll in. Not with fear, but with quiet expectation. She didn't move for a while. Just stared, then got back in the car and drove off. It didn't bother me. If anything, it reminded me how far things had come. She wasn't the same woman who pulled stunts and barked orders. She was a ghost now. A reminder of what power looks like when it falls flat on its face. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling she might come back. The next week, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just a single sheet of paper, folded neat and tight. It was her handwriting. I recognized it from all those old HOA threats. But this time, there were no demands. No rules. Just 10 words. Asterisk, you took everything from me. I hope it was worth it. I read it twice, then laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Karen. She still didn't get it. She thought I took something from her, when all I did was take back what was already mine, and protect others from being crushed by the same power trip. But that letter stuck in my mind. Not because it made me feel guilty, but because it reminded me of the cost. I never wanted to take her home. Never planned to turn her world upside down. I just wanted her to stop trying to erase mine. But people like Karen? They never stop until someone draws a hard line. So I did. And maybe she'd never understand that. Maybe she'd go to her grave thinking I was the villain. But that's the thing about stories. The villain always sees themselves as the hero. I tucked the letter into a drawer and went back to work. There was a lot to be done. Winter was coming in fast, and I had a few new families moving in before the holidays. One of the properties I bought had a busted furnace. I drove out there myself with tools and a space heater. No property manager. No middleman. Just me, doing what needed to be done. The tenants were a young couple with a baby on the way. The husband worked long shifts at the mill. The wife kept thanking me over and over while I tightened bolts and cleared dust from the vents. You didn't have to come out here yourself, she said. Sure I did, I replied. It's mine. I take care of what's mine. She nodded and smiled. That kind of smile that's full of relief. The kind that says she finally feels safe in her own home. That made it all worth it. Because every family I helped settle in, every dollar I put into fixing what Karen tried to break, it was all part of something bigger. I wasn't just patching up walls or changing light bulbs. I was rebuilding trust. The kind of trust Karen shattered when she thought she could take a ranch at gunpoint. The kind of trust you only earn back through action, not words. And every day that passed, more people understood. More neighbors waved. More fences were taken down. The land started to breathe again. It wasn't just my victory. It was the neighborhood's revival. And the story wasn't over yet. The first snow came early that year. Light at first, just a thin white layer brushing the rooftops and fence lines, but enough to bring everything to a quiet pause. Mornings were crisp. You could hear the crunch of boots on the ground clear across the pasture. I loved that sound. It reminded me that some things never change, no matter how much the world tries to. Red was getting older, but he still followed me everywhere. He'd wait on the porch until I grabbed my coat and then trot down the steps like it was his mission. We did our rounds as always, checking the barn, the gate, the fence near the west field. I noticed something strange at first light. A single box on the porch of Karen's old house. No truck. No movers. Just that one cardboard box sitting at the top step. I walked over. Inside it was a vase, cracked and dusty, and a handwritten note taped to the side. No name. No greeting. Just 5 words, asterisk, do what you want with it. That was it. No signature. No hint of what it meant. But I knew who it came from. Karen may have left, but she still couldn't help herself. One last attempt at control. Or maybe it was her way of saying goodbye without actually saying the words. I didn't toss the box. Didn't break the vase. I just set it aside in the shed next to a pile of old ranch tools that hadn't been touched in years. Because the truth was, I didn't need to make a show of it. She had already faded from the picture. And that house, now full of life and laughter, was no longer hers in any way that mattered. Later that afternoon, I stopped by one of the newer homes I'd taken over. It belonged to an older man named Frank, a Vietnam vet who'd been forced into silence by Karen's rules. She fined him once for flying the American flag on the wrong side of his porch. Made him take it down. He told me that story when he first moved in, barely able to get the words out. Now, he had 2 flags waving freely. One on each side. He waved me in when he saw the truck. Told me his granddaughter had just come to visit for the first time in years. Said it was the first time his house ever felt like home. We sat at the kitchen table with hot coffee, talking about ranch life, small town changes, and how peace isn't always quiet, it's just right. When I got home that evening, there was a message waiting on the machine. Another property owner was looking to sell. No pressure, they said. Just figured I'd want first dibs. It never got old hearing those words. Because it wasn't about owning everything. It was about reclaiming the space we all lost when Karen's rule turned neighbors into suspects and community into competition. Every property I bought, every rule I threw out, wasn't about revenge, it was about restoring something we'd forgotten. That night, I walked the line one more time. Snow was falling again, heavier this time. Red's paw prints trailed behind mine as we stepped through the pasture toward the creek. It had started to freeze at the edges, glinting under the moonlight like glass. I looked out across the fields, toward the ridge where Karen once tried to redraw my boundaries with survey flags and printed maps. That same spot was now lined with new fencing. My fencing, built by hand with help from the very neighbors she once fined. Funny how full circle everything came. I never meant to be the guy who changed everything. I just wanted to hold on to what was already mine. But somewhere along the way, people started seeing the difference between a rule and a reason. Between authority and respect. Between fear and freedom. And that's when things really started to grow. Not just the ranch. Not just the neighborhood. But the people. A few days before Christmas, I found myself standing in front of the fireplace in the main house, hanging a wreath my mother used to keep in storage for special winters. It was hand-woven, worn at the edges, with pine cones still stuck in place after all these years. The fire cracked behind me, warm and steady. Outside, the snow had covered every inch of the ranch in silence, like the land itself was resting. That's when the phone rang. It wasn't a tenant. Not a neighbor. It was the county office. They were calling to confirm a filing I'd submitted months ago, something I hadn't told anyone about yet. It was official now. A petition to rezone the entire block around the ranch had been approved. The properties I owned were no longer part of the HOA district. In fact, they were no longer even connected to the subdivision. I'd carved a new boundary. Legally. Final. It meant no more surprise inspections. No more fake fines. No more power struggles. My land, and the land I'd bought back from her grip, was free forever from HOA reach. I didn't dance. Didn't cheer. Just took a long breath, hung up the phone, and looked out the window. This was what it felt like. Real peace. Not temporary silence. Not a break between fights. But actual, permanent peace. And somehow it felt quiet. Not empty. Not dull. Just calm. Later that evening, I bundled up and took Red for a walk through the snow-covered trail between the old shed and the edge of the woods. A few kids from the neighborhood had built snowmen on one of the open lots I'd cleared last summer. They gave each one cowboy hats and stick arms posed like they were waving. I couldn't help but laugh. A dad across the street raised a hand in greeting. He was stringing lights along his fence, something Karen never allowed before. Said it made the neighborhood look cheap. Now every house glowed. Reds, greens, whites, golds. Some blinking, some solid. It was a mess, honestly. But it was beautiful. Because it was real. Nobody was trying to outdo each other or prove anything. It was just families being families again. For the first time in years, people were celebrating like they weren't being watched. That night, I stopped by the house that used to belong to Karen. It was glowing too, softly, not loud. Inside, the vets were gathered in the living room. Some were wrapping gifts for families in town. Others were sipping cider, laughing at a rerun playing on a small TV. A service dog laid near the fire, snoring quietly. I dropped off a few boxes of supplies and waved them off when they tried to thank me. "This house belongs to y'all now," I said. "Just keep it filled." They promised they would. I stepped back out into the cold and looked down the street. Most of it I now owned. Not in a power-hungry way. Not in some empire-building fantasy. Just as a guardian. A steward. Someone who knew how easily something good could be poisoned, and had seen what happened when one person thought they owned the right to silence everyone else. It all started because someone thought they could bulldoze history and plant a pool in its place. That they could hold a gun and erase 150 years of sweat, memory, and roots with one arrogant threat. But land doesn't forget. And neither do the people who love it. Now, everything they tried to control was free. Not just mine. Everyone's. And the community they nearly strangled with rules and paperwork? It was blooming again. Red and I walked home under the stars. No lights from city buildings. No sound but snow falling through the branches. I didn't need applause. Didn't need credit. This was never about revenge. It was about restoration. And it was working.